if we pivot there and start talking about some of your work in sport, and obviously we hear a lot about fueling for the work required and working in contact sports like rugby, fueling for the damage induced. Can you talk a little bit about, obviously through your career, but through your research, how collisions impact energy demands? Because when we think of the translation to American football, to ice hockey, to all these sports where, it is obviously playing a key role, and it's oftentimes can still get missed.
Yeah. So the second paper you talk about, what we call fuel for the damage induced, was kind of pinching my colleague James Morton's fuel for the work required.
Yeah, exactly. Nicely done.
So James published that data, which I think has been amazing. I was proud to be involved with that with James, where for many years, we've grown in our department to think about carbohydrate in a very much a periodization strategy. And you've got a group of people who are saying that carbohydrates are all evil and that's why we're overweight. And then another group of people saying athletes must live on carbohydrates. And what we've realized over years is actually we need to fuel for the work required. So there will be certain days where I go quite low on carbohydrates, and then other days where we really ramp it up, particularly the day before a game. So we were carbohydrate loading, but maybe on our low training days, we're a little bit low. So that was, I think, a little bit game changing and really change the way that a lot of people think about carbohydrate in sports. But a follow up to that, and it was work from James Hudson, who's my PhD student, who's again a former rugby player, now the nutritionist for Gloucester Rugby in the UK. We got speaking about within this fuel for the work required paradigm, were we giving enough attention to what happened after the event? So we were getting really clued in on what we do building up and during an event, but what about after? And we noted that from working rugby, the day after a game is often a really poor eating day. And that's partly because you feel like you've been run over by a bus and you maybe want that little bit of extra time in bed.
Some comfort foods and
correct, yeah. So you comfort foods, or even skipping a breakfast because you want to stay in bed, or whatever. And was realizing that does the body actually need more on that time? It makes perfect sense. So James managed to get the Gloucester rugby team to come in every day of the week to get the metabolic rates measured. And what he showed quite clearly was in the days after a game, resting metabolic rate was increasing. And in some situations by greater than 500 calories.
Wow.
And that's huge if you think about RMR is normally pretty tight. But the day after a rugby game, the body's crying out for at least another 500. So we followed that up then with some novel metabolomics techniques. So for those who aren't familiar with metabolomics, it's the latest probably in the omics, where we've gone through genomics, studying the entire genome, proteomics, and now we're into the entire metabolome. And what we were seeing in this situation is despite feeding more protein, we were seeing increased protein oxidation. But actually, it seemed that protein oxidation was to provide substrates for gluconeogenesis.
Interesting.
So the body's wanting more carbohydrate in this situation is our interpretation, and is potentially getting that from protein. So we thought, well, actually, the body wants more carbohydrate, and we did see an increase in RER. And this was a day when traditionally we would go quite low on carbohydrate, because in the fuel for the work required paradigm, there's not a lot of work required. And so that's why we made it the suggestion about, okay, as well as fueling for the work required, let's also fuel for the damage induced. And that immediately changed how my mindset and how I tried to feed the rugby players. And I think it would be important for things like NFL and other collision-based sports where the day after a game, we know there's an increased caloric requirement, but also the metabolomic work we do is suggesting, as well as keeping protein high, we probably have made a mistake in the past by ramping protein even higher. Where actually, as we know, once we've hit that protein threshold, what we probably should have been doing is giving more carbohydrate to help with recovery. And that's what I now do.
It's fascinating stuff, especially when we think of a season. I'm thinking of an NHL season, 82 games, or an NFL season, obviously in rugby. For the coach, the practitioner listening in on that day after the game, just as you said, you feel like you've been hit by a bus. What are some of the strategies then to help get the guys and gals even who are, the appetites may be down? How do we then get extra carbohydrate? Does it matter if it's coming more in simple form? Like what are some of your go-tos?
Yeah, I really don't think it does matter if it comes in simple form. And one of the things that we've tried to do is take the players on a recovery journey. So what we'll do is obviously have a food in the different stations, but make sure we'll make a little bit more emphasis that they visit. But obviously they go to the protein station, so they get their omelettes. But then there may be a specific recovery station next, which will be, we might have 3 different shots, but all carbohydrate based, but with one with berries. We might try and have one with a bit more greens based. So almost make it a little traffic light system, a red, amber, green, but it's just a neat way of getting 3 little shots into them with different nutrition that we think will be good. We might put things on that are a bit more fun on that day. We will always have a big recovery smoothie that we use. And we try and make that day a bit of fun as well. And we might even finish with like a relaxation station where in the summer it might be an iced latte and even a little bit of carrot cake or something like that. So just by trying to make that recovery process a bit more fun, we might, if the weather's nice, take it outside and have some fun activities outside as well. We might have the saunas and the ice baths outside with the food all next to it on this recovery station. And we find then that by making a bit of fun and making a thing of it, the players spend more time in that world, and then they'll be snacking and grazing. And then we can really make a big effort to actually get them out of bed and get them into the recovery process. And we found that's had a great effect.
Tremendous. I definitely want to come back to that sort of, creating the atmosphere and the fun piece, because it does play such a big role in food. What would your suggestions be for certain sports where the athletes have an off day the following day, and so they're not coming into the facility and they're at home? And so for the practitioner then sort of providing suggestions might be a little bit similar to what you suggested there, but are there ways that you might think about it of saying, okay, how are we going to help this athlete who's, tired and wants to sleep in to get that extra energy?
Yeah, I think education, and I'm going to say that being a university academic, everything's about education, but I think an awareness that, Luke, as much as you probably want to stay in bed and rest, the best thing we can do is get you up and get you moving and get the nutrition into you straight away. And then we can start to look at, even if you're from home, whether it's relaxation, ice baths in your own house or whatever, but just an education. And then just pitching it in that same way that I said about, Luke, what we're trying to achieve, and whether we go with the 3 hours of repair, rehydrate, replace, or whatever system you want to come up with. But just an education that, Luke, we want to repair the muscles, so we want a good protein source, so knock up some omelettes or something like that. We obviously want to rehydrate you, so making sure we're getting some good liquids. And we want to replace these carbohydrates that have been lost. And we might give them recipes of different smoothies. I've mentioned that a few times, but I think when appetite's low,
nice way to get
go into something like your NutriBullet or your Ninja or whatever you use. Throw in some Greek yogurt, some milk, some berries, some honey, some nut butters, or whatever you want to throw in. Smash up a recovery smoothie. It's just an easy way to tick all them boxes and then get on with the rest of your day.